You wake up, reach for your phone, and before your feet even touch the floor, the world has already begun telling you who you should be. A headline warns that everything is changing. An algorithm decides what deserves your attention. A stranger's opinion somehow feels more urgent than your own thoughts. By the time your morning coffee cools, you've absorbed hundreds of invisible suggestions about what matters, what success looks like, and what kind of future is waiting for you. It happens so quietly that you barely notice it. But every now and then, usually in the silence between notifications, something unsettling slips into your mind. A question you can't quite shake. Why does everything feel so temporary? Why do the institutions that once seemed permanent suddenly look fragile? Why does the pace of change feel less like progress, and more like standing on the edge of something impossible to predict? That feeling isn't paranoia. It isn't pessimism. It's the strange awareness that history has entered one of those rare moments when the rules people relied on for generations begin to dissolve all at once. Most people assume the world changes gradually. They picture history like a slow-moving river, flowing in a predictable direction. But history has never worked that way. It moves quietly for decades, then suddenly accelerates. Entire civilizations spend centuries believing they've reached stability, only to discover they were standing on foundations that had been cracking for years. The people living through those moments almost never realize it while it happens. Think about someone living in Europe in the late 15th century. Their daily routines looked ordinary. Farmers planted crops. Merchants sold cloth. Priests delivered familiar sermons. Families worried about weather, disease, and paying their debts. Then, within a remarkably short period of time, the printing press spread ideas faster than any empire could control them. New continents reshaped economies. Religious authority fractured. Scientific discoveries challenged truths that had survived for centuries. The old world didn't disappear overnight. It simply stopped making sense. Something similar happened during the Industrial Revolution. A blacksmith watching the first factories rise couldn't possibly understand that machines would eventually redefine cities, education, family life, politics, and even the way human beings measured time. Clocks became more important than seasons. Productivity replaced tradition. Entire ways of life quietly faded into memory. History rarely announces itself with a loud beginning. Instead, people notice the ending first. They begin saying things like, "Nothing feels the way it used to." If you've caught yourself thinking that lately, you're not alone. Across the world, millions of people share the same uneasy sensation. They struggle to explain it because nothing seems obviously broken. Grocery stores are still open. Airplanes still fly. Offices still operate. Yet beneath the surface, confidence in nearly every major system seems to be weakening. Trust in governments fluctuates. Trust in media fractures into competing realities. Careers that once promised lifelong security are being transformed by automation and artificial intelligence. Universities face questions they never expected. Even the definition of what it means to create, to work, or to think is changing faster than many people can emotionally process. The strange part is that the technology itself isn't the only story. The deeper story is what it reveals about us. For thousands of years, human beings occupied a unique position. We believed our intelligence separated us from every other creature on Earth. Language allowed us to cooperate. Stories allowed strangers to become nations. Shared beliefs built kingdoms, religions, financial systems, and legal institutions. Civilization itself rests on invisible agreements that exist only because enough people choose to believe in them. Money has value because we collectively trust it. Borders exist because enough people defend the idea behind a line on a map. Corporations become powerful because millions agree to treat legal documents as if they describe living entities. Even your identity depends partly on stories, your nationality, your profession, your reputation, your future. None of these are physical objects you can hold in your hand. They exist inside networks of shared imagination. That realization is both beautiful and unsettling, because if human civilization is built on stories, then every major technological revolution eventually changes the stories people are willing to believe. For most of history, those changes unfolded slowly enough for generations to adapt. Parents taught children skills that remained valuable throughout an entire lifetime. Knowledge accumulated gradually. Experience mattered because the world stayed recognizable. Today, that rhythm has shattered. A teenager may understand technologies that experienced executives struggle to comprehend. Entire industries emerge and disappear within a decade. Information spreads globally in seconds, while truth often arrives much later. For the first time in history, humanity isn't simply creating tools. We're creating systems capable of generating ideas, making decisions, recognizing patterns, and producing knowledge at speeds no individual mind can match. That changes something profound, not only what humans do, but what humans believe they are. For centuries, intelligence felt deeply personal. It was tied to memory, creativity, reasoning, and imagination. These qualities formed the foundation of education, careers, and social status. They shaped entire civilizations. Now many of those abilities are becoming increasingly shared with machines. The implications extend far beyond employment. If intelligence can exist outside biological brains, where does human uniqueness truly begin? It's an uncomfortable question. Most people avoid it because daily life leaves little room for existential reflection. Bills need paying. Families need attention. Emails keep arriving. Yet beneath ordinary routines, another process unfolds almost invisibly. Our understanding of ourselves is quietly evolving. Psychologists often describe identity as a story the brain constantly updates. You aren't simply remembering your past. You're continuously editing it into a narrative that explains who you believe yourself to be. Every memory, every success, every failure becomes part of an internal autobiography. That story provides stability. Without it, life feels chaotic. Neuroscience suggests that the brain works less like a camera recording objective reality and more like a prediction engine. It constantly anticipates what comes next, using past experiences to reduce uncertainty. Familiar patterns create comfort because they allow the brain to conserve energy. Unexpected change demands attention. Rapid change exhausts us. Perhaps that's one reason modern life feels so mentally overwhelming. It's not merely that more information exists. It's that our predictive models keep breaking. Every week introduces new technologies, new social norms, new economic realities, new fears and new possibilities. The future no longer feels like an extension of yesterday. It feels like an entirely different landscape arriving before we finished understanding the last one. And whenever humans lose confidence in predicting the future, anxiety naturally grows. Our ancestors experienced similar emotions before wars, plagues, revolutions, and economic collapses. Not because they knew exactly what was coming, but because familiar patterns stopped working. That uncertainty is one of the oldest psychological experiences in human history. The difference today is scale. For the first time, uncertainty spreads globally almost instantly. A breakthrough in one laboratory affects workers across continents. A financial decision made in one country ripples through markets thousands of miles away. A single line of computer code can reshape industries that employ millions. Everything has become interconnected, which also means everything has become more fragile. A forest appears strong until one disease reaches every tree. A civilization appears stable until one invisible assumption begins to fail. The unsettling possibility isn't that society suddenly collapses tomorrow. It's that the assumptions we've quietly depended upon for decades may no longer describe the world that's emerging. And when assumptions expire, people don't merely lose certainty. They lose orientation. That's when history becomes unpredictable. Not because the future has vanished, but because the old maps no longer match the territory ahead. Losing your map is one thing. Realizing that everyone around you is using the same outdated map is something else entirely. That's often how civilizations drift toward turning points. The buildings are still standing. The streets are still busy. Elections are still held. Markets still open every morning. From the outside, everything appears familiar. Yet underneath, the assumptions holding everything together begin to shift so gradually that most people don't recognize the transformation until it has already changed their lives. History is filled with these invisible transitions. The Roman Empire did not wake up one morning to discover it had fallen. Generations lived through its slow unraveling. Roads still carried travelers. Coins still exchanged hands. Soldiers still guarded borders. But confidence, the invisible force that had once united millions under a shared idea, was quietly fading. Long before the empire disappeared from maps, it had begun disappearing from the minds of the people who lived within it. That pattern repeats itself across cultures and centuries. What changes first is rarely the infrastructure. It's the story. Human beings don't organize themselves around steel, concrete, or currency. We organize ourselves around meaning. We sacrifice for ideas. We cooperate because we believe tomorrow will resemble today. We trust strangers because we assume they are participating in the same social contract. When enough people stop believing the old story, a new one rushes in to replace it. Sometimes that new story leads to extraordinary progress. Sometimes it leads to chaos. Usually it's a complicated mixture of both. One of the greatest misunderstandings about history is the belief that technological revolutions automatically improve human life. The printing press gave ordinary people access to knowledge, but it also accelerated propaganda and religious conflict. Industrial machines produced unprecedented wealth, yet they also transformed workers into interchangeable parts of enormous economic systems. The internet connected billions of people, while simultaneously creating new forms of isolation, manipulation, and division. Every powerful tool amplifies something that already exists within human nature. Technology doesn't erase our instincts, it magnifies them. If we are curious, technology expands curiosity. If we are compassionate, it strengthens our ability to help. If we are fearful, angry, or addicted to certainty, those emotions scale just as quickly. That's why the biggest challenge of the coming decades may not be whether machines become more intelligent. It may be whether humans become more self-aware. Have you ever noticed how quickly your mind reaches for certainty? A rumor spreads online, and within minutes people divide into opposing camps. A new scientific breakthrough appears, and before anyone has time to understand it, thousands of confident opinions flood the conversation. We often mistake speed for wisdom, as though the first explanation must also be the correct one. Our brains evolved for survival, not perfect truth. Thousands of years ago, hesitation could be deadly. If something in the bushes looked dangerous, assuming the worst often kept our ancestors alive. Better to mistake the wind for a predator than the predator for the wind. That ancient survival system still operates inside every one of us. Except today's predators aren't always physical, they're informational. Every day, your attention is hunted. Companies compete for it. Politicians compete for it. Influencers compete for it. Artificial intelligence learns what captures it. Entire industries have discovered that attention is one of the most valuable resources ever created. Because where attention goes, behavior usually follows. This changes something profound about freedom. Most people think freedom means having more choices. But what if real freedom begins one step earlier? What if it's the ability to choose what deserves your attention in the first place? Neuroscientists have found that attention is deeply connected to perception itself. The brain filters overwhelming amounts of information every second, deciding what reaches conscious awareness and what disappears into the background. In other words, your experience of reality isn't simply what exists around you. It's what your mind allows you to notice. That means whoever shapes your attention influences your reality more than you might realize. And modern technology has become remarkably skilled at predicting where attention will go next. Recommendation systems don't merely respond to your interests anymore. They anticipate them. They learn your habits, your emotional triggers, your moments of boredom, your curiosity, even the times of day when you're most likely to keep scrolling. Convenience has become so seamless that it often feels invisible. That's the paradox. The more personalized our digital worlds become, the easier it is to mistake comfort for truth. When every article reflects your assumptions, every video reinforces your beliefs, and every algorithm quietly removes perspectives that challenge you, reality can begin shrinking without you ever noticing. It feels expansive, but it becomes increasingly narrow. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once warned that the greatest dangers often arrive wearing familiar faces. We tend to expect dramatic threats, wars, disasters, economic collapse. Yet some of the most significant transformations happen quietly, through habits repeated so often they become invisible. A civilization rarely changes because one extraordinary event forces it to. It changes because millions of ordinary people begin behaving differently every single day. Think about how relationships have evolved. Not long ago, waiting for a letter required patience. Conversations unfolded face to face. Silence existed naturally between interactions. Today, messages cross oceans instantly. Video calls erase distance. Social media offers endless connection. And yet loneliness has become one of the defining emotional experiences of the modern age. How can a world that has never been more connected also feel so emotionally fragmented? Perhaps because connection and presence are not the same thing. 1,000 digital interactions cannot replace the feeling of being deeply understood by another human being. Our nervous systems still respond to eye contact, shared laughter, quiet moments, and physical presence in ways no screen has fully replicated. The human brain evolved in villages. Now it navigates global networks. Our biology hasn't had time to catch up. Carl Jung believed that much of modern suffering comes from becoming disconnected from the deeper parts of ourselves. He argued that beneath our public identities lives a quieter, often ignored inner world, a place filled with fears, creativity, contradictions, and unrealized potential. Modern society encourages us to polish the outer self, careers, profiles, achievements, authority. But the inner self rarely receives the same attention. The result is a strange imbalance. We become experts at managing appearances, while slowly losing contact with the person behind them. Have you ever reached the end of a busy week and realized you barely spent 5 uninterrupted minutes alone with your own thoughts? Not distracted, not entertained, not performing. Just listening. For many people, that kind of silence has become uncomfortable. Because silence allows questions to surface. Am I living according to my own values? Or simply adapting to expectations I never consciously chose? Those questions can feel unsettling, but they may also become increasingly important. Because as artificial intelligence grows more capable of performing external tasks, writing, analyzing, calculating, generating ideas, The qualities that remain uniquely human may have less to do with raw intelligence, and more to do with wisdom, judgment, empathy, courage, and self-understanding. Machines may process information faster, but information alone has never guaranteed meaning. Meaning emerges through consciousness, relationships, responsibility, and the stories we choose to live by. So here's something worth reflecting on. If someone looked back at this era 100 years from now, what would they say people were sleepwalking through without realizing it? What invisible habit do you think future generations will struggle to understand about the way we live today? I'd genuinely love to hear your perspective, because conversations like this become far more meaningful when different minds explore the question together. The answer may reveal more about the future than any prediction ever could. And perhaps that's the most fascinating part of this moment in history. We keep searching for certainty about what the next decade will bring. Yet the deeper challenge has never been predicting the future. It's becoming the kind of person who can remain fully human, even when the world refuses to remain familiar. There is an old saying that every generation believes it is living through unprecedented change. In many cases, that's true only from the perspective of those experiencing it. But every so often, history reaches a threshold where the pace of transformation doesn't simply accelerate. It changes the very nature of what it means to be human. This may be one of those moments, not because the world is ending, but because one version of it is. The world your grandparents prepared for was built on a relatively simple promise. Study hard, develop a skill, build a career, save money, raise a family. If you were willing to work consistently, tomorrow would probably look a little better than today. It wasn't a perfect promise. And it certainly wasn't available to everyone, but it was stable enough to become the foundation of millions of lives. Today, that certainty feels increasingly fragile. Entire professions are being reinvented almost overnight. Skills that took decades to master can suddenly be assisted, or even surpassed by software. Information that once took years to acquire now appears in seconds. The pace of adaptation has become so relentless that many people no longer fear working hard. They fear becoming irrelevant. And perhaps that is one of the deepest anxieties of the modern age, not failure. Obsolescence. For thousands of years, human beings defined themselves by what they could contribute. The hunter hunted. The farmer farmed. The blacksmith forged iron. The teacher carried knowledge from one generation to the next. Identity and usefulness were tightly connected. Now that connection is becoming less obvious. If machines eventually perform more physical labor, more cognitive work, and even more creative tasks, what remains at the center of human identity? That question cannot be answered by economics alone. It is a philosophical question, a psychological question, a deeply personal question. The Stoic philosophers understood something that feels surprisingly relevant today. They recognize that human beings suffer most when they attach their identity to things they cannot ultimately control. Wealth disappears. Status changes. Empires rise and fall. Public opinion shifts with astonishing speed. The only lasting foundation, they argued, is the character you build within yourself. For centuries, that sounded like moral advice. Today, it increasingly sounds like practical survival. Because if the external world continues transforming faster than any generation before us has experienced, inner stability may become one of the most valuable resources anyone can possess. That doesn't mean withdrawing from society. It means learning not to confuse constant change with constant danger. Our brains often do exactly that. Neuroscience has shown that uncertainty activates many of the same systems involved in responding to physical threats. When the future becomes difficult to predict, the nervous system becomes more alert. Stress hormones rise. Attention narrows. We become more reactive, more impulsive, and more likely to cling to simple answers that promise certainty. This is why periods of rapid change often produce extreme ideologies. When reality feels confusing, certainty becomes emotionally irresistible. People stop asking, is this true? They begin asking, does this make me feel safe? History offers countless examples. During times of instability, charismatic leaders have often gained influence not because they possessed better answers, but because they projected unwavering confidence. Certainty can be persuasive even when it is wrong. Doubt, on the other hand, is often mistaken for weakness, even though honest doubt has driven many of humanity's greatest discoveries. Science itself advances by questioning assumptions. Philosophy advances by challenging comfortable beliefs. Personal growth begins the moment we admit that the story we've been telling ourselves may be incomplete. Perhaps the greatest challenge of the years ahead is not learning how to predict every change. Perhaps it is learning how to remain curious in the face of change. Curiosity is an underrated form of courage. It allows you to step into uncertainty without demanding immediate answers. It replaces panic with observation. Instead of asking, how do I stop the world from changing? It asks, What is this change revealing about who we are? That shift may sound subtle, but it transforms everything. Because once you begin observing rather than merely reacting, you notice patterns that were always there. You notice how fear spreads faster than understanding, how outrage often travels farther than wisdom, how attention has become one of the world's most contested resources, how silence has become almost revolutionary. When was the last time you sat without music, without podcasts, without scrolling, without trying to fill every empty moment? At first, the silence can feel uncomfortable. Then something unexpected happens. Your own thoughts begin returning. Not the thoughts someone sold you. Not the opinions repeated thousands of times online. Your thoughts, the kind that emerge only after the noise settles. Those moments matter because they reconnect you with something modern life constantly pulls you away from. Your capacity for reflection has shaped every major turning point in human history. It was a reflection that led ancient philosophers to question power. Reflection that inspired scientists to challenge accepted truths. Reflection that allowed ordinary people to imagine societies different from the ones they inherited. No algorithm can replace the experience of wrestling honestly with your own conscience. No machine can decide what kind of life is meaningful for you. Technology can generate possibilities. Only human beings can assign purpose. That distinction may become more important than ever. There is a temptation to view the future as something that simply happens to us. As though humanity were a passenger watching history through the window of a speeding train. But history has never been written by technology alone. It has always been shaped by the choices people make after new technology arrives. The printing press could spread knowledge or hatred. Television could educate or manipulate.